turnout here. We're hoping for more people who are apparently arriving later on. And I'm just very glad to see there's more participation. And the purpose, of course, is to find consensus in how we move forward as representatives of working class movements. We know that many people are not even bothering to participate in elections, whether we agree with elections or whether we agree on more direct confrontations to the injustices that do exist. So I think that as representatives of the working class, we have to unite and we have to find consensus and move forward so that we can be a solution and not just talkers. And we have meetings and we have to find consensus and we have to find a way so that we can move South Africa forward. So I hereby open this debate officially. It's being live streamed on Facebook, on the Facebook page of Ama Bolsheviki. And you can also record. You're welcome to record. It's only audio, not video, that's being live streamed. And we welcome you. We've handed out numbers. So the participants is International Bolshevik Tendency. Tony is representing them. Socialist Party of Azania. Are we still waiting?
No, it's here.
Oh, marvelous. You'll have to give him your number. Solidarity Action Committee Collective, that's GIFT. Spartacist South Africa, Jesse. And each participant will be given 15 minutes to speak. I've got a timer here. I'm going to be very strict. And but we'd also like you to be free. And then of course we'll start with in number order, numerical order. So whoever has 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then when we summarize, we'll do it backwards. So 4, 3, 2, 1. And then of course we really like people to participate as well. You know, what's the viewpoint? What do you see happening? We're going to have elections soon. Who are they going to vote for? Are you going to be represented? Are we going to be rising above all our differences and our personalities? Are we going to focus on the good rather than on the bad and move the working class forward? That's the purpose. Thank you. Number 1.
Thank you, and thank you, comrades, for coming out, all and the participating organizations and everybody else for participating in this important debate. I want to start with where we are today. There's a few things that I think all of the organizations that are taking part in this debate, and probably most of the people in the audience, would agree on. Number one, that the aspirations of the black masses for liberation were betrayed after 1994. Socially and economically, basically all of the old crap from apartheid remains unchanged. And actually, economically, the conditions of the masses are getting worse, and they are now set for a severe shock with the onslaught from the GNU and with Trump and US imperialism squeezing the whole country. Number two, I think we generally agree that the central responsibility for this lies with the main leaders of the liberation movement, the ANC, and especially its tripartite alliance partners, the leaders of the SACP and the COSATU bureaucracy who subordinated the working class to the 1994 sellout negotiated under the auspices of imperialism. But I think there's another thing that most of us would agree on, which is that in the face of all this, the revolutionary left has been unable to offer a convincing alternative, and that we haven't been able to win decisive sections of the working class, but not only that, we have lost on influence in the working class, even as the masses have increasingly turned their backs in disgust away from the tripartite alliance. So I think that that is the background to consider when we look at what is happening in the face of this massive onslaught from US imperialism and the real paralysis of the working class and the left to actually resist it. It is shaped by these factors. I don't think any of this is going to be the main issue of dispute in the debate, so I'm not going to try to convince you all of that. The real debate is over why things have gone this way and what we as revolutionaries need to do to regroup and help turn the situation around. And what I want to focus on is one thing. I'm going to sort of go through that, but what we think as Spartacists is that behind all of these problems and this reactionary development lies one thing as the revolutionary left, which is the failure of the left to pursue and carry out its task, which main task is revolutionaries, which is to compete with the nationalists for revolutionary class struggle leadership of the liberation movement, to expose them before the masses and offer an alternative path forward, and that is the main thing that revolutionaries have to do. And when I say the failure of the left to carry this task out, it actually is the case that the left as a whole has hardly even posed this as a task, or they reject it outright. And let me say, because we Spartacists have a reputation for always being right and always knowing that we were right and telling everybody that when I say this, I absolutely include our own organization among the left who has failed to do this. We have only recently come to the conclusion that this is actually the main task of revolutionaries in rejecting much of our previous approach to the national question and the task of revolutionaries in South Africa over the course of some quite wrenching discussions and a reorientation in our international in the last few years. And so I want to make that clear, and also that's why the debate here to actually clarify these differences and clarify what exactly are the lines of dispute is very important, we think, for going forward. So why is anti-imperialist struggle central, and why is it important to fight for communist leadership of it? This is not something that's just our own subjective whims. We think this would be nice to do. It actually flows from the material conditions in society and the dynamics of class struggle that are shaped by them. When you look around, every aspect of economic and social life is stamped by the subjugation of South Africa to imperialism, above all to the US imperialists. They are the ones who call the shots on everything from energy policy to debt to who gets locked up, which opposition politics get locked up. And alongside that, the working class and the black majority of this country are subject and continue to be subject to national racial oppression and super-exploitation at the hands of the white big bourgeoisie, which is deeply committed to maintaining the subjugation to US imperialism. And I would say this in itself is not necessarily something that we are going to disagree about. Most people wouldn't dispute it because it's so obvious when you look around us. Look at the preparations for the G20. The main difficulty comes in when it comes to how to deal with this. And in particular, how do you relate that to the nationalists and the black elites that they rest on? And here I would say we see that there are two main traps which the left falls into. On the one hand, there are those on the left who point out the treacherous role played by the nationalists and that the nationalists seek to place themselves at the head of the liberation struggle in order to subordinate the masses and subvert the struggle in defense of to advance their own narrow interests, which leads to betrayals. This is absolutely true. This is what happened with the negotiated settlement. But the problem is that this one section of the left draws the conclusion from this that it is wrong for communists to put the anti-imperialist struggle and the liberation struggle at the center of their tasks. That to do so can only be a capitulation to the nationalists and lead to class collaboration. Instead, and we have one group, the IBT, who is speaking after me, who will defend this view, I think. They say that the main task of revolutionaries is actually to separate the class struggle, the anti-capitalist class struggle, from the national liberation struggle. That is where they go wrong, I think. Then there's an opposite group, another group that falls into the opposite trap, which is that they say, they look at the crucial importance of fighting imperialism and national oppression, and they point out, and they're absolutely right, that the nationalists and the black elites are also subject to this oppression, and it is in their interest, and they do in fact sometimes try to push back against imperialism on this, which is all true enough. But from that, what they conclude is that the role of the working class and communists is to keep the nationalists on side, to keep them consistent in their anti-imperialist course. Now, both of these trends recognize a part of the truth, the reality, but both of them are dead wrong in their overall assessment and the task, the political task that they draw from. The fact is that the nationalists and the black elites, they are both oppressed by the white rulers and utterly dependent on them. And the only means that they have to push back against that oppression is to lean occasionally on the masses, which is why they pose as anti-imperialists. How they can rally the nation, try to rally the nation behind them. But to conclude from that, either that the task is to keep them consistent, or that we should reject the national liberation struggle, we think both of these are completely wrong and lead to disaster. The task rather is to fuse the two elements together, the class struggle and the national liberation struggle, and show in competition with the nationalists that these tasks can only really be accomplished, they can only be driven forward under a class struggle leadership with class struggle methods that are fundamentally counterposed to that of the nationalists. And that the movement, as long as it stays chained under the nationalists, is going to lead to disaster. That is what we mean by competing with the nationalists for leadership of the liberation movement. Now let me move on to more sort of the current situation and what sets it up. I think that if you do not view political developments through the lens of the role of the left to fight for leadership, then you can't make any sense of the trajectory of the revolutionary left politically since Americana. Why has nothing come of the hopes raised by NUMSA's break with the Tripartite Alliance and the foundation of SAFTU? Why was NUMSA's SRWP a complete failure, stillborn from the start? Why have groups like WASP lost even the marginal influence that they had when they were founded in 2013? Nobody has a convincing answer to this other than pointing at this guy did it, that guy did it, this conference, that conference, these words that we wrote that we should have been in the program. And the reality is that you cannot deal with any of this in a coherent and convincing way if you ignore the elephant in the room, which is the EFF, which is exactly the left force, the left opposition to the ANC, that none of these different groups and none of the left as a whole has had any convincing answer to. Namely, the challenge posed by the EFF's existence to workers, including workers in NUMSA, that the leadership could not both convince to vote for the SRWP, of why should we join your group when there is this mass party with massive influence whose radical demands are basically the same as what all you guys say. They are for expropriation of land. They are for the nationalization of the commanding heights of the economy. They even talk about socialism. And in our opinion in Spartacist, it's in fact impossible to answer this challenge from the EFF unless you start by dealing seriously with the core contradiction at the heart of that party. The reason why it had attracted so much mass support, and also why it is unable to actually do anything with that, and now on the decline. Which is that, on the one hand, the EFF's appeal is based on a program of demands that speak to the burning aspirations of freedom that were betrayed by the ANC. We all know what these are, the 7 cardinal pillars. It's basically a new, updated, more radical version of the Freedom Charter. And it is precisely because of its demands that the EFF as a party is completely unacceptable to the white monopoly capitalists who call the shots in this country. It's why the GNU was formed. Everybody told Donald Trump when they visited the White House. But on the other hand, and the other part of the contradiction, is that it's the EFF's petty bourgeois nationalist leadership and strategy which are the very thing that stands as an obstacle every step of the way to actually advancing a struggle for those cardinal pillars. Because it stands as an obstacle to uniting the masses behind the working class to actually confront the white monopoly capitalists. And instead, that is not an accident that the EFF promotes parliament instead of class struggle, that this is their main focus actually. Is because their whole strategy, this nationalist strategy, is based on winning the disgruntled sections of the black elites to come to them. That they are the way, they are the means, that the EFF is the means to advance them, and keeping unity with them and behind them. For revolutionaries, we think that the task that follows from this is we must work and fight at every step to sharpen this contradiction. To show both in our arguments, but also in deeds, in action, that this is the case, and that the EFF militants who look to that party because they think it stands, and they see it as the means to advance a radical change, the cardinal pillars, that they need a fundamentally different strategy and leadership, one that bases everything that it does on the class struggle. Okay, sorry. So obviously, this is easier said than done. But the whole point is that to begin with that, you first have to set this as your task, as your goal. And here again, we will debate it more, but I would say the left as a whole rejects this. The main trend, the most dominant thing on the far left is to say, the EFF, we don't want to have anything to do with them. They're a bourgeois party of the class enemy, right? Well, first of all, it is kind of peculiar if it's a party of the class enemy that the actual class enemy, the people who call the shots, don't want anything to do with it, the white monopoly capitalists. But it's also peculiar that as a party of the class enemy, its members come out singing songs about socialism, that at its conferences, the leader of the party can quote Marx and Lenin for hours on end. This is a hint, perhaps, comrade, that this rigid, abstract category is not really a tool to deal with this phenomenon. And that it's better to focus on actually dealing with the EFF as it is, and how to recognize and sharpen the contradiction that exists. Okay, so I'm going to be very quick in the end because I missed time, I ran out of time. But to get back to where we are today, because we're in the situation where the EFF has been the main opposition to the ANC for the past 12 years. And now, especially after the elections last year, it is not being challenged by the revolutionary left, it's under pressure from the right. And there are a lot of communists and Marxists who say, well, that's great. Better for us. Let's go forward to building a mass workers' party. What I want to say, comrades, just to conclude very quickly, is that there is no way that the effort to build a mass workers' party is going to be any different from the failed attempts like the SRWP, unless it sets as its task actually fighting to compete and to destroy politically this as an obstacle in the way of moving the liberation struggle forward and moving the class struggle forward.
Thank you. Tony?
I don't know whether. Okay, sir, thank you. Okay. All right, comrades, Dumelang. Yeah, the loss of support in the May 2024 election by the African National Congress represents the end or death of nationalism in South African politics. After 100 years of dominance from the white Afrikaner to the black petty bourgeoisie. And this left a big impasse on African national politics, especially the liberation of the oppressed masses. After waiting 30 years of the ANC misrule, which has left the country in the hole. The country is without political map going forward. A deadlock between the black masses has been reached. I'm talking about a deadlock between the black masses and the ANC. It was in September 1909 when the British King signed the South African Act into law, thus passing political authority over South Africa from British Parliament to the Parliament of the Union of South Africa, which was formed in 2010. South Africa has been under nationalist rule for 115 years, starting with the Afrikaner generals that were accommodationist to British imperialism. I hope you remember General Jan Smuts and General Botha. To be followed by the more anti-British imperialist Afrikaner nationalists from Herzog to the Klerk in 1994. The African nationalism in 1910 to 1914, in order to achieve these objectives, Afrikaner nationalists used the state to develop transportation and communication infrastructure, as well as to establish a vast network of state-owned enterprises in broadcasting, my paperness is being 40 years. A vast network of state-owned enterprises in broadcasting, armaments, power generation, development, finance, iron and steel, and chemicals. Thanks a lot, Corey. Thank you. African nationalists also facilitated the outgrowth of Afrikaner entrepreneurs, several of whom developed into international brands. While consolidating the cohesion of Afrikaner population under their leadership, Afrikaner nationalists embarked on a massive drive to disrupt the cohesion of black community. Their main instruments being the migrant labor system, single-sex hostel, forced removals, stripping blacks of whatever assets they had, and blocking them from acquiring new ones. The purpose of these measures was to atomize the black population so that it could not resist. All these methods expose the black population to being exploited as cheap labor. It therefore took the blacks many years before they could recover sufficient cohesion to mount meaningful opposition. This started to happen on a significant scale only in the 70s and in the 1980s. The rule of African nationalism, however, had a built-in contradiction that ultimately led to its undoing. This was political and economic oppression of the blacks, which eventually resulted to the endless conflict between the African nationalist controlled states and black population. These conflicts, reinforced by interventions by international community, ultimately led to the birth of Africa's democracy in 1994. The Nationalist Party dissolved into the ANC and closed shop, as we know. African nationalism took over after that. Each country's democracy is a product of that country's social and economic structures, as well as a result of balance of power of the various social groups in that particular society. South Africa's black nationalists, while they were an elite, as we have seen, they were never an elite that owned property. This was to be a crucial factor in determining the characteristics of South Africa's democracy, especially the nature of its internal contradictions. The new black elite were therefore faced with several questions when it got control in 1994. Should it use the newfound power to enrich itself? Should it use the new power to enrich the mass of the black people who had been exploited for the best part of 100 years? Should it do it both? What about the wealth of South Africa's rich whites, which they allowed to keep? The ANC allowed to keep the white rich to keep their wealth. Should it be nationalized? Should it be taxed? And to what extent? Those were the questions that were asked by the nationalists when they get into power in 1994. South Africa's big business had anticipated all these questions and came up with its own solution. It offered a small part of the assets to the individual leaders of the black resistance movement in return for them leaving the country's business environment entirely as they found it when they took power in 1994. The leaders found this offer of instant wealth hard to resist. The cooptation of the black nationalist elite by the business came to be known as Black Economic Empowerment, or the BEE. This was never a policy of the ANC during exile. This was a completely multiracial organization, including colored, blacks, whites. They never proposed the black economic empowerment as a policy for enrichment. This was handed over to them by the white capitalist rulers of South Africa. South Africa's largest companies, notwithstanding their deal with the black nationalists, realized that conflict between the black nationalists and the black masses was inevitable and would probably be even more fierce than the struggle between the black masses and African nationalism. Thus, within the 5 years of black nationalists taking control of the state in 1994, South Africa's largest companies like Anglo-American Corporation, Mutual, Bilton, South African Breweries, and Dimension Data moved their head officers and their primary listing from Johannesburg to London. So as soon as the ANC came into power, they moved their assets and started to invest overseas in London. You know what I'm talking about. I'm not going to tell you this. Anglo-American, which once accounted for more than 50% of the Johannesburg Stock Exchange market capitalization, and which had had a major presence in almost every sector of South African economy: gold mining, banking, motor vehicle, agriculture, etc., etc. It was left with only 4 mining interests: platinum, diamonds, coal, and iron ore. What were the risks that came with black nationalist rule that these large corporations identified, which led them to migrate from South Africa? We saw earlier that the African nationalists, in order to advance its interests as landowners, had to drive South Africa's industrialization. The black nationalist petty bourgeoisie, on the other hand, are not property owners. Their primary interests are not so much to drive further industrialization, as they had nothing to gain from increasing investment. Their primary interest is to drive the black elite's private consumption. This poses two major threats to the stability of South Africa. Private consumption would be at the expense of investment, especially of investment in South Africa's physical infrastructure. Secondly, growing elite private consumption will be in competition with the consumption of the black poor and state employees. The country ran out of electricity because, despite many warnings that state-owned power company Eskom needed to build more power plants, governments turned a deaf ear. They did not want to make the necessary investment in power generation or to open up power generation to independent power producers. Parastaals have become a cash cow for black nationalist elite. I'm talking about the Eskom parastal. Also in 2008, for several weeks, South Africa was caught up in what came to be known as xenophobic riots, which left more than 60 people dead and thousands uprooted from their homes. These were manifestations of another decision not to invest, the time to invest in the army. South Africa thus left its borders uncontrolled to a flood into South Africa into South Africa's poor neighborhoods of economic refugees from many parts of Africa. This competition for natural resources between South Africa's urban poor and arriving foreign migrants inevitably led to violent conflicts between these two groups. With the wealth of the whites protected through BEE, the only source for enrichment of the black elite available besides old hard work, that is, were state revenues. That was the only source for enriching the black elite. This has proven to be central internal contradiction of the era of the black nationalist rule. This contradiction can be summed up as follows. Who gets what share of state revenues between the elite's private consumption, the poor people's welfare consumption, investment in social and physical infrastructure, as well as payments to other claimants such as workers in public sector. Competition between these claims on state revenues has become increasingly explosive. South Africa, therefore, now is entering a new phase of conflict. The conflict between the black nationalist elite and the black masses over how to distribute state revenues between them. This struggle is commonly referred to as a struggle over service delivery. The July 2021 events starting and mainly concentrated in and around Durban, but also reaching parts of Gauteng and Mpumalanga is one example of this. And it left between 350 and 400 dead, and hardly anybody wrote anything about this. The class independence of the working class from the bourgeoisie state and against all its political parties is a very critical stage because not many options remain. In the first plenary session, I strongly questioned the invitation of EFF as a capitalist party, an enemy of the working class people. We will always talk to rank and 5 members of this organization trying to break from nationalism into the struggle of socialism and overthrowing capitalism. But there's one thing that we'll never do. We will never give them political support in the form of the vote like the Spartacists did in the last elections, 29 May 2024. Can I request an extension? 5 minutes.
No, we're not able to. Unfortunately, I'd love to, but I can't.
Chair, can you allow the House to...
So if all the groups would agree, we could take it out of the summary time. Extra time, people need to finish their presentation and be taken out of the summary time.
Do you want to do that? I think it's best that you go for the summary. Personally.
Well, what does the people say? Finish. The House is saying I must finish.
What do you say?
You time it, and then when we do the summary,
You take that time. Okay, fair.
I don't think you're doing yourself justice, but okay.
I apologize.
Fine. Carry on.
Okay. With the wealth of whites thus protected through BEE, the only source for enrichment of the new black elite available, besides all fashion work, is state revenues. This has proven to be the central internal contradiction of the era of the black nationalist rule. This contradiction can be summed up as follows. Okay. Who gets what share of state revenues between the elite's private consumption, the people's poor welfare consumption, investment in social and physical infrastructure, as well as payments to other claimants such as workers in the private sector. Competition between these claimants on state revenues has become increasingly explosive. South Africa is therefore now entering a new phase of no, I've read this.
you had just denounced us.
Okay, it was after denouncing you for voting the EFF. Thanks. The biggest political sickness of the left is to tail nationalism until it takes them to the grave. The Spartacists that I joined before it became what the Bolshevik Azania taught me that you support the nationalists in the fight against apartheid. Once the nationalists get into power, they turn around and shoot and kill the working people. You saw what happened in Marikana, amongst the biggest example. The biggest political sickness of the left is to tail nationalism until the grave. Nationalism is a bourgeoisie ideology. What alternatives under these circumstances? Fight like hell to build organs of proletarian power, to rule on behalf of the oppressed therefore creating dual power, which counterposes the dictatorship of the proletariat to the capitalist blood suckers that are still running this country today. In the anti-apartheid struggle of the mass democratic movement, in the 80s, Messi started building area committees as an alternative to apartheid state. The most complete example of this phenomenon is the Soviets or workers' councils of the Russian workers struggling against the Tsar, the workers led by Lenin and Trotsky. The International Bolshevik calls for the formation of such Soviets as an alternative to treacherous bourgeoisie nationalist parties, sworn enemies of the working class, armed with Leon Trotsky's theory of permanent revolution. That's our way forward. Thank you.
You were 1 minute 45 seconds short of 5 minutes.
Thank you. I'm not a bureaucrat.
Mother, comrades, basically, I'm Phineas Malapela from Socialist Party of Azania. I want us to just observe a moment of silence where you are. We have lost one of our icons in the struggle, Bani Mokhatle, who was the lieutenant of the 1976 uprising, together with Jezi Mashinini, Hoto Sertolo, and others. He is in fact the last of the lieutenants of the 1976 struggle. So we can just bow our heads a bit. Thank you. I'm not going to say anything which is different from what comrades has already talked here. The Spartacists has already said the bulk of what I wanted to say, what I have written here. That our struggle is a unit. It cannot be differentiated into compartmentalizations. We have got the struggle of the working class and the national struggle. But during the course of the national liberation struggle, that were one. They have never been separated. And if you cannot find sanity in that, we will be deviating from Marxism itself. Because the Marxists believe that the national struggle is first. Each and every nation ought to liberate itself, taking the material conditions obtaining in that particular country, and then they can fight against the bourgeoisie class at the national level. After fighting that, is then that we can be able to say, they can be able to say, now the workers of the world unite, for there is nothing to lose but chains that bind their feet and hands. Black consciousness from its inception has sought to merge the two. When they look at the material conditions obtaining in South Africa, mind you, we must always remember that we were not nationalized by a particular European country. We were not actually colonized by the British or colonized by the Dutch or colonized by the French. But we were colonized by a company, Dutch East India Company. That's the one which invited the European powers to can augment them and protect them. But basically the capitalists are the ones who actually colonized us. So we must always remember that, and Black consciousness took cognizance of that. And then they looked at our society and say, our society historically, because of that, is divided into two compartments. We have got the white ruling class, which is oppressing the ruled class, which is black working class. It discriminates against them in the first place. It oppresses them politically. It exploits them economically. And then it goes, it's logical for that class which is ruled and oppressed and discriminated against to unite itself and then be able to fight against the class which oppresses it. So from the inception, the approach which was taken by the black consciousness is dialectical. And then you can check all Marxists, you can check all socialists in the world. Approach must be dialectical. It must be between the haves and the have-nots. So the black consciousness has taken that approach. As Socialist Party, we know that the question of nationalism is not static itself. It moves with time. It moves with technology. When the society changes, it changes. And that's why we have got an ideology which leads us, apart from the national liberation struggle philosophy, which is scientific socialism. Embedded in the black consciousness approach, which is dialectical, and then depend on the historical materialism of this particular country which we are living in. Then the founders of the black consciousness philosophy has arrived at the same conclusion which Karl Marx and other socialists throughout arrived at. Maybe you can say the intelligent minds arrive at the same conclusion when they look at the same material conditions. So we then adopted scientific socialism as the solution against the imperialist or capitalism, which we call now neoliberal capitalism. When all people were saying nationalism or national struggle is a means to an end, we said as black consciousness, nationalism or national struggle is not an end on its own. An end on its own is the egalitarian society. So socialism itself is not even the end. It's a means to an end. Because socialism means nothing other than the dictatorship of the proletariat. Kosatu was wrong in saying socialism means democracy. That's what they were saying. Socialism does not mean democracy. It means dictatorship of the proletarians. And its main work is to remove the contradictions in the society. If it does not do that, it's not socialism. It's something else. That's why most of the socialist experiments in the world, like socialism in Russia, deviated from doing what it's supposed to be doing. And then it became a bureaucracy. And then it becomes a party oligarchy, which is not socialism, it's a deviation from socialism. So as Socialist Party, we think we agree to an extent with the Spartacists, what they were saying, to an extent with the other comrades who were saying here, that socialism is the only way in which we can be able to solve the problem of contradictions in the society. To that effect, as socialists, we are looking at what is happening now in the country. The bourgeoisie, which is ruling, has bowed down. They agreed and admitted that they cannot rule in the same way as they were ruling before. They then are calling what they call national dialogue to be given direction. The dialogue which they called even before. So they are repeating themselves again. So if we, as the working class, are not actually taking that into account, that the socialist or the capitalist had reached a stage in which they cannot develop human society anymore. They cannot improve the human society anymore without destruction of the means or the production, the labor and other things which sustain the society. If we are not taking that into cognizance, we are going to be the spectators in the game which we are supposed to be playing. And then we will remain like that. It's not that the society is rejecting socialists. No. We reject them. We isolate ourselves. We ostracize ourselves from the society, from the working class itself. That's why the trade union movement or the labor movement ceased in the meantime to be the schools for socialism. They are stuck on the bread and butter issues. They can't go beyond like other working classes in other countries, like in the Soviet Union during Lenin's time, where they were able to move beyond the bread and butter issues. Like in China during Mao's time, when they were able to organize themselves beyond the bread and butter issues. So Socialist Party wants to call upon all socialists in this country, and we are many, to tell the truth. We just need to get ourselves together, and if we get ourselves together, we will be able to move the masses together with us. Black Consciousness did that for 10 years. Within 10 years, they moved and then get the revolution, get the uprising, which changed and then challenged the modalities of apartheid. So if we move according to that line, and then, which is dialectic, and sharpen the conflict, we will be able to change the situation in this country. I think, without much waste of time, we launched a campaign very recently, which actually identified the material conditions of the very same national dialogue which is being moved around here. We call the national dialogue as the dialogue, the national dialogue without ideology, the strategy of the Amagudari. The Magudari are the fallen angels, the people who were in parliament, the people who were ruling, now formed their own smaller parties because they have lost that glory and they want to recover it again. So they want to reinvent themselves. It's only us, as socialists, who can stop that trend. And then to stop that trend, we need to mount a protest against this strategy of the Amaguda, who are trying to reinvent themselves. And in the alternative, we discussed the strategy when we were with the community at Freedom Park, that the only solution is the sovereign national assembly of people of this country getting together to draft a new dispensation which will be able to be controlled by the working class themselves. So that's the only way we can move and then be able to capture the situation as a class. Working class of this country must stop fighting for other classes and start fighting for themselves as a class on its own. Thank you.
National liberation and democratic counter-revolution. South Africa was the colonial possession of Holland and later Great Britain. The Union of South Africa in 1910 and the Republic in 1961 was nothing more than a segregationist and later apartheid racist state, organizing a system of cheap black labor. In real terms, from the point of the black majority, South Africa was the slave colony. The fight against imperial control and domination gives a special national character to the struggle for emancipation. Lenin and the Third Communist International placed the national question at the center of revolutionary struggle, particularly in the epoch of imperialism. The program of national liberation is a program against oppression. The right of nation to self-determination implies exclusively the right to independence in the political sense. The right of free political separation from the oppressor nation, it implies only a consistent expression of struggle against all national oppression, and national self-determination is the fundamental democratic formula for oppressed nations. Leon Trotsky, in his letter to South African revolutionaries, clarified that a social upheaval in the first instance of agrarian revolution was an unthinkable with the retention of British imperialism in the South African Dominion. The struggle for the expulsion of British imperialism, its tools and agent, was an indispensable part of the program of the South African proletarian revolution. Trotsky further argued that the South African Republic will emerge first of all as a black republic. This did not exclude either full equality for the white or brotherly relations between the two races, depending mainly on the conduct of the white. This meant that the majority of the population liberated from the slavish dependence will put a certain black imprint on the state. In this sense, a victorious revolution would radically change not only the relation between the classes but also between the races, and will ensure to the blacks that place in that state which correspond to their numbers. The social revolution in South Africa will also have a national character. The ANC and the SACP also defined the struggle against segregation and apartheid as one of the national liberation, and argued that the political philosophy which we profess is that of African nationalism. This inter alia implies that they, Africans, suffer an alien and foreign oppression. The struggle was to lead the Africans as the nation to regain what they lost in the alienating process of colonialization. The struggle for national liberation was central because of the peculiar nature of South Africa versus internal colonialism, the white oppressor nation and the colonized West African, colored and Indian oppressed nation, diluted occasionally in the official literature as national groups and nationalities. The difference between classic colonialism and internal colonialism was that in South Africa, both the oppressor and the oppressed nations occupied the same geographical area. Strategically, they argued that the national question could only be seen as a national democratic revolution. The struggle for the national liberation and political democracy was the most immediate task. To this end, all oppressed must unite and unite around their common lack of democratic right. To achieve this, SACP argued for two-stage theory. The countries of the world are divided into those which are mature for socialism and those which are not. Those countries not deemed to be right for socialism first had to struggle for the bourgeoisie democracy as a separate stage. The people from those countries are fortunate enough to be classified as an immature or backward will in their struggle for national democracy unite all their oppressed classes, petty bourgeoisie, peasants and workers under the progressive bourgeoisie. In the old Bolshevik tradition, the bourgeoisie is seen as the natural leadership of the democratic struggle. And in reality, such an approach had nothing to do with the Marxists, as it lacked a historical materialist understanding of national development. Economic exploitation and national oppression are part and parcel of the same social system, especially in South Africa, where capitalist development took on a racial capitalism from organized to the basis of super exploitation to cheap black labor. The struggle for national liberation is a struggle for a formally independent country to free itself from the economic yoke of the imperialism. And the resolution to this question is totally bound up with the question of the class which is brought to power. In this regard, it is only the proletariat organized as the new head of the nation that can solve the democratic question. The democratic and socialist revolution cannot be divided in time and space, and the struggle for proletarian power, the dictatorship of the proletariat, was the most immediate task, permanent and uninterrupted revolution. To this end, all the oppressed has to be united under the leadership of the working class and again the bourgeoisie. It is only the seizure of power by the working class and the establishment of the dictatorship of the proletariat which could solve the question of democracy, tribalism and racism and open the road to socialism. If the struggle for national liberation does not mean the struggle for dictatorship of the proletariat, it can end only in giving the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie an extra lease of life as it did. Even today we still see those. By 1970, coinciding with the world crisis in the capitalist economy, the survival of the apartheid capitalism was increasingly called into question. The more farsighted section of the ruling class drew the conclusion that the old order could not continue indefinitely. By the 1980s, recognizing the mass militancy of all sections of the working class, employed workers, as well as the township resident, youth and the students, and the looming threat of socialism revolution, accommodation was sought to the ANC leadership to protect the continued domination of white monopoly capital. Even while the masses were making the township ungovernable and the building street and area committees, ANC leadership, including Mandela from inside prison, were part of the discussion for a negotiated settlement. The cynically used mass struggle, the armed struggle, and the sanction campaign as different instruments for pressuring the apartheid regime into a deal. Within a few years of a rotten deal was brokered. The basic terms were set by the white monopoly capital while they were prepared to accept the majority rule. They demanded assurance that their private property and make profit would not be threatened. They also demanded that the ANC take its radical base, especially the revolutionary-minded youth and the socialist workers. This last pressure bolstered by continued repression on the part of the de Klerk regime, resulting in the demobilization of the masses and the dissolution of the UDF, together with its civic and youth structures. At the same time, the ANC agreed to ditch the nationalization clause in the Freedom Charter. The revolutionary crisis of the 1980s was brought to an end not as a result of a counter-revolutionary violence, but through the betrayal of the leadership of the liberation movement. The ANC and the SACP, they rationalized this betrayal by reference to the theory of national democratic revolution, which they call the NDR. The necessity of the separate democratic stage and reliance on the progressive patriotic bourgeoisie in the name of democracy, they prevented the revolution from maturing and effected a democratic counter-revolution. 31 years down the line, we are bearing the fruit of this betrayal. The ANC government committed to the bourgeoisie class rule and carrying out the neoliberal economic program of the imperialist bourgeois. The class struggle in the post-apartheid period. The class struggle in South Africa is a product of a dialectical relation between race and classes. Our struggle is an anti-racist class struggle to establish a non-racial society, a social society. The two defining moments in class struggle in the post-apartheid period is the Marikana massacre, the NUMSA Special National Congress resolutions. The Marikana massacre revealed, like no other event before, the class struggle of the ANC as part of the capitalist class as a whole, and the mining bosses in particular. The Marikana massacre accentuated the political disenfranchisement of the working class and laid before all the necessity for a party of the working class. Long before the Marikana massacre, there had been a deepening sense amongst organized workers that the Tripartite Alliance was a political presence that institutionalized the subordination of the interest of the working class. The SACP and COSATU leadership are the present warriors to ensure there is no escape. The Marikana earthquake created a fault line dividing post-apartheid SA into two epochs, drawing to a close 2 decades of illusion in an unquestioning political alliance with the ANC, and opening a new period where the question of an alternative working class politics would emerge, which will enable the working class to reclaim its class and political independence. The most advanced political response to the Marikana massacre came from the NUMSA, who adopted a militant and revolutionary approach to the process. They promoted the formation of a new trade union federation, SAFTU, a united front, and a vanguard political party, the SRWP. While SAFTU is in terminal crisis exemplified by the bitter internal fight between the trade union bureaucrats, the United Front is a shadow of itself, and the SRWP has been liquidated by its leadership. The crisis of the world capitalist system, economic, social, political, and ecological, finds expression in the crisis of the South African capitalist system. After 29 years of neoliberalism, the working class is on the back foot. Deep level of poverty and hunger, a 40% rate of unemployment, the expanded division and social malaise and disintegration characterize the society. The social fabric of the society is severely endangered by the breakdown of all essential services like education, health, water, electricity, sewerage, other municipal services, etc. Furthermore, since the formation of the GNU 1.5 years ago, wages, employment, and services such as water interruption has seen a deterioration in the condition of the black working class. Wages stagnated or rose less than inflation for low-paid workers in the late 2024 and 2025. Increases in food and utilities continue to erode purchasing power. Unemployment among lower skilled group and persons without matric remained very high. Nearly 39% unemployment for people without matric in 2025. Continuing failed water supply and interruption for poor black communities has become widespread. The working class is in retreat rather than positive and organized social alternative to capital parties. They retreat from the political arena, as seen in the large stay away and absence from participating in the 2024 general election. They have also largely remained silent in the race of the right-wing turn in government with the formation of the GNU. The general level of class consciousness is low. The trade unions are weak and disorganized and divided. The civic formation have largely disappeared, and most NGOs have become nothing more than feeding troughs for their leaders. The left is weak and disorganized. It is small and fragmented with the limited implantation in the working class. The entire left is in crisis. The declining voters turnout and declining support of the ANC pointing to a serious crisis of political representation for the South African ruling class. Their political rule is based on the mandate of a minority. This is a crisis of legitimacy of the ruling class, and clearly something new has to take place. We know that in the last period something is taking place in the working class. Beneath the apparently calm surface, powerful currents are building up. This is a gradual accumulation of discontent and frustration in the masses, which increases as it elapses and finally boils over. Trotsky called this process the molecular process of revolution, like molten rocks shift slowly and imperceptibly in the depths of the society. So to does the same process take place in the society. In our action committee work, we are experiencing a significant growth of working class interest, combativity, and readiness to fight back against the system. We hosted over 90 comrades from different working class communities from 3 provinces in discussion of local government election during September. We are also treated very carefully by the ANC Council, as they are aware that we pose alternative power to their rule. There is no question that the deepening social and political crisis is provoking the kindling of coming huge conflagrations. While all this is in an embryonic stage of a deployment, we may quickly move from a non-revolutionary period to a pre-revolutionary one. The task of the revolutionaries, our task is to build the organization and social consciousness of the working class through applying in our day-to-day work the method of the transitional program, moving from today's conditions and consciousness to a social consciousness and conditions. In accordance with this approach, our central strategic political task is to defend the working class. We do so through the building of solidarity action committees in our areas. These are food and gardens feeding scheme, women and children oppression empowerment, land and housing, unemployed workers community, time to learn after school classes, political education classes, internationalism, advice offices. This is a part of process of rebuilding the working class movement, its integrity and preservation, self-confidence, combativity, and organization. Through the participation in active struggle and political education, a new layer of militant class activists will gain experience and knowledge. We must strengthen trade unions by taking up the struggle against bureaucratism and reformism of the trade union leadership. We build the broadest possible organized unity amongst organized workers and the other section of the working class. A good starting point is to participate actively in the South-to-Job losses and factory closures campaign. This will bring the big battalion of the working class South to Abahlali Makua, left political formation and progressive NGOs into the struggle and assist in the establishment a united front of the working class. Side by side with rebuilding the working class movement, we must address the question of political leadership of the working class. What we have is a crisis of leadership, the absence of revolutionary Marxist leadership. The left is weak and exists in small groups and operate in silos. We think that the tactic of mass workers' party is appropriate at this conjuncture, as there is a need for a working class voice in the body politics. We must start a campaign for workers' party. The only way the working class can take power is to have centralized working party, a vanguard party of the class. This is not going to happen through uniting small groups of Marxists. We have a non-secretary approach to working in the mass movement and with the political groups. We have adopted a conscious policy of working with all class formation. The condition of this work is to promote revolutionary work-class politics and defend this at all times. In united front work, while the discussion on theory, program, and practical political work is necessary and continuous, we believe that we can only find common ground and share a revolutionary program and platform if we struggle together and test our views and commitment in practice. Amanda.
4 minutes.
1 minute.
4 minutes. Go on.
No.
Extra. Thank you, comrades, for your insights and recommendations and so forth. We go on to the summaries now. Or, yeah, so would you like prefer to go with the discussion? Okay. Shall I hand it down the mic? Anybody? I'm something. I think a gift, you know, a lot of what you said is, I think something that was more about the resolve, about how we could achieve. And I think also, is it Mr. Malebo? Malabelo. I think that you've just, everything that you said, you know, carries that message that all these things can only be achieved with unity. You know, so we can speak about liberation, which didn't happen, and we can speak about class struggle, but at the end of the day, we have to speak about resolution. You know, what resolution is going to be taken? How do we achieve it? Are we going to have another public debate next year and talk about the same things next year? What are we going to do? There's an election next year. What are we going to do? You know, so we talk about parties that perhaps have the biggest class percentage of the working class, and they hold sway, they hold influence. You know, why can't we use the leverage that they have? You know, those are questions we should be asking ourselves. So anyway, the floor.
Hi, comrades. Can I sit or should I stand? Stand. Okay. The first question is this thing about the EFF, and that's very interesting because Marxists have historically adapted themselves to the growth of nationalist movements. I remember when the ANC was unbanned in 1990, Wilson, with International League of South Africa, broke up and split and dissolved into the one faction that said, no, we need to join the ANC so we can transform it into a mass workers' party. And the other group, which was the minority group, stayed and said, no, the task is to build a workers' party. And they continued with that task, though isolated, because the period had changed. Imagine discussing the question of building, transforming the ANC at the very point when the betrayal was being effected in the country. I mean, that was just crazy. As crazy, I think, is the idea that we must tail behind the EFF. The program of the EFF, let's talk about it. The program of the EFF is a radical nationalist program. The Freedom Charter, if you analyze it, is nothing more than a nationalist bourgeois program. And I think Marxists have to be critically analyzing the Freedom Charter rather than adapting to it. We need to train the working class in the character of the Freedom Charter. The leadership of the ANC are nothing more than demagogues. I mean, anyone who has watched Malema perform and the politics of Malema, talking radical in a conference and then getting onto a plane and going to spend a weekend in Mauritius with his bourgeois buddies. And of course they're intolerant of any opposition. We were approached maybe, I think it was 2 years ago, by people in the youth sections from the universities, the EFF Youth League, to say, comrades, we need you to come and train us in Marxism, because I'd worked with some of these comrades in the United Front. But unfortunately, they didn't win the elections because they were outmaneuvered by Malema, who put his own leadership in place. So there's no place for maneuver in the leadership of the EFF. The critical point with the EFF is that they are very, they are supported by the youth of the country, by disillusioned working class, by people who are searching for answers. And it is to those people that we need to reach out. Like Comrade Gibbs said, we work with all political formations, including the EFF. But I must tell you that in all our relations with them, they have proved to act in a dastardly way. They, 2 years ago, I think, when they called for the big stayaways, organized with us on the ground, and we all arranged to work together. And in the morning of the protest, when they realized that we had organized the many hundreds of militants to participate in the protest, they did not pitch up. In our local councils, the EFF councillors are rotten to the core. They come from the ANC. They only join the EFF because they failed to hold a position in the ANC. They are not revolutionaries. They are not there to fight for emancipation. And I think we need to be very careful. We must work with them, but to adapt, to follow the EFF, and to think that the future liberation of the country lies with the EFF is a mistaken view. And I wish to just advise our comrades from Spartacist regarding that. The question that we pose is that the defensive struggles to rebuild the organizations of the working class is the most important question right now. And from the defensive, as the class struggle is intensifying, we will move to the offensive. I must say, in our environment, with 2 years of building defensive struggles, and they're only in an embryonic form, mustn't pretend to have these powerful organizations because they're not powerful. But what they have done is shaken the very core of the political scene in our town. When our comrades stand up to address the mass of people, the ANC, its councillors are shaken by what is happening in their working class. So there is something happening in the working class. There's something new happening. And if we fail to respond to those struggles, we are going to once again leave the political field to the right wing who are going to control the politics of our country. The time is now to intervene on the basis of defending the working class and using that as a platform to take our struggles forward. Thank you.
Sangana. My real name is Ule Mukoti, and my slave name is Ishmael, and my revolutionary name is Betisha. Comrades, I'm a bit skeptical about this setup because I understand that it is being recorded and live streamed, and now from all the speakers, it sounds like, actually it is like that, it is there. Everyone is fed up with the government and the system. And it's one way or the other, we have to turn things around. Then we will be regarded as terrorists. All these talks that we've been discussing, the uniting of all the oppressed masses, it is obvious we are against the government and the state and the systems. But now, we are powerless. The only power we have is ourselves, the working class and the poor. Because in whatever we do, whether we join them in the parliament or in the councils, we are still going to use the very same laws that they are using to govern us. And we are also going to be using the very same system that they are using in the government. Like for instance, all of us here, we are new parties that are not having anyone standing there. But once we participate in the elections, believe me, they are going to be funded. They are going to be given money to participate in the elections. And then what follows next, we get into that position of council or national provincial legislature or in parliament. They are going to get paid. But the ideology is socialism. Socialism, according to my understanding, is to share amongst all. Whatever we have, it is ours, it is not for myself. Now, for all of those things to achieve, we should stop having this type of debate and some love letters. We must be real. Because whatever you are doing, writing letters and appealing and taking matters to court and all those, like, now we are going for elections. There's going to be a dispute about the elections. But at the end of the day, the very same people will be ruling. The very same people will be the one who presiding over the counting of the elections, the appeals, the court cases, everything will be controlled by them. So I believe for us to reach different results, we should step with different food, because we cannot do one thing and expect different results. Thank you.
Let me appreciate our speakers, all the speakers, for the inputs that they've made to this discussion. I want to propose, comrades, something that has already been proposed, in fact, by the Gauteng Housing Crisis Committee in one of their meetings. That from what has been presented here by the comrades, in order for us to move forward is to, based on what is happening in our country, to call for this government of national unity to fall. We are all agreeing that there are crises of legitimacy. They were not voted by the majority of our people, you see. And there's also Mahanga Commission that gives more clarity in terms of what they represent. So our view is that we must really call that they must fall. But then what happens when they fall? I think that Malapela spoke about it, the sovereign, independent, constituent assembly. Because if we call for them to fall, but Malapela says that they are already fallen, the strategy of Amakutari, it means they are already fallen. So if they are already fallen, what do? We constitute an independent constituent assembly. So I want to propose that maybe if we all agree on it, think about the day of an action where we will be really doing something about that. According to our thinking in GHCC, we were thinking about next year during the state, is it the State of the Nation address? That address which they normally have each and every year when they open the parliament, we occupy the Constitutional Court with this specific demand. It's just a proposal, something that we are doing to the House to think about.
Who's next?
Thank you. My name is Lufefe, and I'm from the People's Empowerment Collective, which is a student collective from the Western Cape that has been founded on our shared experience. And what we do is we learn and we also organize horizontal networks of aid, solidarity, and knowledge. So I come to this meeting as a student, and I'd like to first of all respect and acknowledge the work that has been put into organizing this sitting. So first of all, I'd like to thank Ubaba Phineas for recognizing the student struggle, which is still pretty much ongoing as it is today. And we can talk a lot about where we are and what has happened. So I studied in UCT, Cape Town, obviously where the contributions are the most heightened. And to talk about the issue of electoral politics, specifically in regard to the EFF, it's actually a mess. And to be honest, the students are struggling, and perhaps that's why I'm here today to ask for support from the government, because we talk about, I think it was survey that acknowledged the question as to why the EFF is quite popular to the masses, especially students. And my experience down in Cape Town is that it's been completely reactionary, right? Black people are being violated, black people are dying, but there aren't any alternatives for students. And we do really feel neglected because we talk about how, but I'll give you an example of the protests that happened earlier this year in town, where we could see the collapse of ideology from the EFF-led SRC and the way we actually supposed to be doing things. There's no sense of direct action, there's no sense of urgency from these comrades, and we ourselves need to pull ourselves together and organize from the grassroots. So I guess that's my question to all the comrades here. I know, and it's quite obvious that there's quite a dissatisfaction with the top, but I think now it's actually time that we take personal responsibility as people who come from communities that need our service, that need us, right? And not to look at this thing as being opportunistic, but how we could actually be the sacrifices that we know need to be made. So I will write later on a much clearer question, but that's what I bring to the floor. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, comrade. Comrades, I think that a precondition for uniting or having intersections with the ANC, EFF, or any other party that has any deportment that is anti-imperialistic, is the precondition is that the working class has to have its independent political organization and capacity to be able to express the conjuncture between the bourgeois nationalists and ourselves. We need to understand that South Africa was settled when it was in 1994, the process up to 1994, because of a convergence of international circumstances. And autarky, like the apartheid system, was quite inconvenient and also not legitimate to be able to be absorbed into the neoliberal international order, which is a free flow of capital, goods, and labor, and a free and the outsourcing of production where you find it cheapest. That is why 96 happened, where gear put us into reverse gear, the deindustrialization. Today, the political convergence is that yes, South Africa will be geopolitically contested, and imperialism is showing its naked face. But where does imperialism find resonance, and what is the imperialistic point of commonality between 94 and now? Is that we have in this country champions of the imperial project. Because the champions of the imperial project are those who benefit most from it, and largely coincide with the white parties. But that doesn't mean that the black petty bourgeois or the bourgeois doesn't vacillate. And so I think the strategic task is to take into account, yes, that there are points of intersection. Zuma going off to Morocco is not there to just say hello. He gets into the bed of US imperialism through its subaltern in the form of Morocco, and will seek funding and any military or other aid should the country conflagrate. Because the possibility of things happening here in that fashion is huge, given our geostrategic location. So, if we are to be ever forced into tactical alliances or intersections with bourgeois parties that may be radical and black, they become very tenuous unless we have the building of capacity of the class. So in the late 80s, early 90s, everyone knew apartheid had to go. There was a focus on getting rid of it. Yes, we all agree as to how. We can talk about it another time. At the moment, there's no socialist consciousness. And people ask, why are we worried about Palestine? They can't see the connection. And unless we show that every camp in this country is actually Gaza, and people can see that commonality. And the only way to do that is to build on the ground, as tortuous as it is. But the quantum leaps will come as the contradictions sharpen. Thank you,
Okay. Excuse me. No, I just wanted to appreciate the presentations that were made and the discussions. This is mainly in response to Comrade Shaheen and others who critical of our stance on the EFF. So, I mean, the first point that I wanted to make is that it's all good, you know, and we agree with denouncing nationalist methods, you know. This is something that we think should be transplanted by class struggle methods to fight for those 7 criminal pillars. We're not confused about that. We're very clear about what should be done. Okay, class struggle is needed to fight for those, because we don't trust nationalist leadership. Not just leadership, their strategy too. We understand very well that at a certain point in the struggle, and you see this when you look at anti-apartheid struggle, nationalists are threatened by the tempo of struggle. Okay? It threatens to sweep them away. Okay? Now, what we're saying is all of these contradictions that are there must be accentuated, given prominence okay, so that the masses see what these guys are, okay, that exposed to the masses. That this kind of leadership is actually an obstacle in the fight for what they're calling for. They cannot even realize our own demands in the course of struggle. That's the whole point, okay? Our second point is this, national liberation, okay, okay. How do you use national liberation, or how do you lean on it for social emancipation? We don't think that the elections represent an end of nationalism. That was a defeat, but not an end. And you take into account what Trump is doing today, okay, the tariffs and all, right? You look at the moves by the fifth column, what I call the Orange League, you know, Solidarity, TGA, AfriForum, TAU, and all of these guys, the Orange League, I call them the Orange League. You look at their moves opposing affirmative action, triple BEE, right? There's a backlash, there's an outrage at the base of society against all of that. And when you look at these and you think that, okay, nationalism has ended, I think it's a deluded position. Okay, the whole, I mean, one comrade that was talking about dialectics as a method. Take nationalism, okay, use that method to look at it. Yes, it binds the oppressed masses, you know, to the black elites, but that's not the only thing in operation. Okay, nationalism of the oppressed is a product of imperialist domination and domination of white monopoly capital, right? That's why it's there. It expresses a striving, okay, against all of that oppression. Now, this is the progressive aspect that you can lean on to drive the struggle for social emancipation. That is our approach on this question. Okay, so we appreciate the concerns, and we think that one ought to be careful in dealing with this dynamic, but the whole thing has been laid out in Trotsky's theory of permanent revolution, actually. To say that nationalism has ended, right? What democratic question are you going to, use as a lever for socialist, for struggle for socialist revolution in this instance? You know, it's prominent in our country. ANC hasn't solved it, right? The real question is actually the other side of it, national oppression. To say that it is, dead, I think it's a deluded position, like I just said. Okay, and we ought to again always go back to that theory of permanent revolution, because it sets out how to struggle for working class, dictatorship of the working class in neocolonial and semi-colonial countries, and the meat is in the Russian Revolution, literally. So it's important to study that. Geez, there's a lot that I want to think about. I don't know. We don't have time. I was supposed to go out there by 3, right? Maybe I should give her a chance. I mean, the point raised about the Constituent Assembly, I think, those are supportable, demands. These are the things that can be raised during the political struggle. And I think the other thing that is useful about it is to look at how the Bolsheviks actually used it to fight for working class, power in Russia. Those parties, the Social Revolutionaries and the Mensheviks, they kept postponing it. It resonated with the masses, The Bolsheviks, stood on it, So these are the things that can be, the democratic programs that can be used, as something to lean on to fight for workers' power. And I think, if something like that ought to be worked on or whatever, can be talked about. In other words, we're prepared to entertain you. Okay, you guys still have to do some else.
Mistakes. There's someone over here. Do you want to go next stage? And then you, and then
Hi, comrades. My name is Arthur. I'm also a supporter of Spartacist. I'll be pretty brief just on the topic of alliances with bourgeois organizations, the topic of moving the working class struggle forward from just bread and butter issues. I think this is sort of relevant. We have a concrete proposal. You know, it's important to debate the class nature of the EFF. But, you know, what's going on right now is that Donald Trump summoned Ramaphosa to the White House, pointed at a video of Julius Malema and said, why isn't this guy in jail yet? A few months later, Malema is found guilty of gun charges, which are clearly bogus because we know AfriForum, who brought the charges against him, is not a gun safety organization. They are a lobby group to shut up black militants and demonize them and put them in jail. So we think that people need to see through what these gun charges are, this campaign, the imperialist driven campaign against Julian Malema. Whatever your criticisms of the EFF are, if you do not see this as an imperialist campaign to shut up one of the key leaders of black people in South Africa for daring to speak out about nationalizations, if you don't take a stand on this, you are neutral or cowering in the face of imperialism. We want to make that really, really clear. We have drafted an open letter to the labor movement, to Abahlale Masindrongolo, Amku, Nupsa, and Safdu. And the title is, We Need Unity to Defend Ourselves Against U.S. Imperialism, Why It's in the Interest of All Socialists and Trade Unions to Defend Julius Malema. We have copies of this at the back of our table. It is a draft letter. We'd like organizations to take it, read it, consider it, and join with us in a joint statement to the union leadership. Because about this campaign that the SOFTU bureaucracy is on, I regret the non-attendance of MWP and WASP at this meeting, non-participation. They said they're busy with building this campaign for plant closures, which we attended a Zoom meeting. They said we're going to do factory closures. We don't know what factory yet. Well, you know, sort of need to proceed, not from a bureaucratic fashion, but more to the point. Class struggle needs to have a anti-imperialist political leadership, and the current leadership of SOFTU and NUMSA are not charting a course of struggle against imperialist domination centrally. Comments from different organizations, please take copies of the open letter. Let's discuss.
How do you account for the VBS looting? The VBS looting, stealing. How do you account for leaders that, steal? Is that also part of the imperialist plot to bring them down? I mean, the VBS, there's evidence that the EFF were quite heavily implicated in steel. So, but how does that help us, to... The imperialists have stolen a lot more. No, but how would it solve our problem if we start stealing?
It doesn't solve our problems. It does not solve our
we have
problems.
limited resources. How do we now? That's a challenge. How do we then now
It does not solve our problems.
form an
But
egalitarian society?
in order for imperialism to thrive, it needs corrupt leaders.
Yeah, but now, I mean, if you react and you steal from VBS, which was not imperialist money, it was poor people's money that was stolen.
Yes,
You know?
that you quite right, and it's true. But at the same time, if you don't have people like that, then the imperialists can't win.
The status quo is still entrenched. They're still entrenched there. They're still there.
Yes.
So if we can steal our own people's money,
So what is the solution? So what is
it's
the
a challenge.
solution?
It's very challenging.
So what is the solution?
I just want you to, I think we need to consider that question because there is a lot of evidence to show that the EFF leadership, and not EFF members, the EFF leadership was complicit in the theft at VBS, and that was working class people, poor people's money. But that's a different discussion. I just want to respond to the comrade who mentioned me by name. I come from a place called Potchefstroom. There is a railway line that runs through Potchefstroom. On one side of the railway line, there are whites with a sprinkling of upper class blacks. On the other side of the railway line, it is black and poor. What that teaches us concretely is that the struggle is both a race and class struggle. And there is that relationship between emancipating black people and the working class that's inextricably linked together. So the question of us involved in the so-called national struggle, it's not finished yet. It has still to be completed. Our contention is that it's only the working class that completed. But for leftist organizations, the problematic for us is that you do not do independent work in the class. We're constantly following and finding simple ways to build our forces, when we should be going into the class, learning to defend the working class in everyday work, so that we're able to be organically linked as the left in the struggles of the working class. Otherwise, there's no future for that left. And that's the problem of the left. The left are largely comprised of middle-class intellectuals, people that are very comfortable in their lifestyles, and they find it difficult to get involved in the day-to-day struggles of the working class. That for us is the central issue. We will work with the EFF, especially with its rank and file. Like Comrade Gates said, we work with all working class formations. Where there are working class people, we will work with them. But we work with them on the basis of our independent politics.
I won't be long. Hello everyone. I'm relatively new to spaces like this. Probably a year or two. And it's probably many people who are very well read in this room and know much more about all of these topics than me. But someone as a new entrant to this space, I can only share my own perspective. I think to get involved in this space is really, really difficult. Finding, I see things that I feel are wrong in this country. I'm also from Potchefstroom, probably on the wrong side of the railway line. And it's probably why it took me so long to get into these places. And you see things in here that in South Africa that break your heart. You really hope that things can change. And all of the speakers started and gave us a background of South Africa's historical context. And I don't think many people will disagree with the historical context. But it's very difficult to see where all of this is going. How do we move forward? How do we change all of this? I tend to agree with Comrade Gift
as someone who's new to this space, and you talk to people about this, there isn't a lot of knowledge, especially in the class that I'm from, about what all of this is about. It's very difficult to convince people. And I think a lot of work needs to go into that. And how we do that is probably where I think this debate should be focused. There's a lot more work that needs to be done. But that's just my own perspective as a new into this space.
In response to the issue of Julius Malema, comrades, and his convictions, we are all stuck in this mess because of some sunset clauses, Codesa negotiations agreement that will be maybe released somewhere in 2070. Because on my understanding, Uguti, Malema is found guilty in the court of law. There are no witnesses in this case. And yet, there's another case where 5 people were in their house, but the witnesses in the court are about 84. Then things go good to know. And no one is being found guilty on that case. It's still running, but the Malema is ended. So it is a strategic move by the capitalists and the imperialists to see that they realize good to know Malema is their troll. Now they used him. Now they are done with him. All his actions was to be on their side, to pretend to be working for the poor, yet working against the poor. For an example, you will say go and occupy land and take this by force. But at the end of the day, they are now on his bedroom. He lives comfortably with security surrounding him. The very same people he command to do this and that, they are exposed to each and every day's danger from the criminals and from the police and from the very same courts and the correctional system. Now, comrades, what I was trying to say when I say we must be real and do things differently, stop using the love letters and stuff, because this course, they are not working. Maybe our constitution is unconstitutional. We must dissolve it permanently and restructure ourselves and create our own constitution by the people, for the people, to the people. And thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Let me thank you for the invite, wherever I got it from. My name is Tupuvo Masheni, and I'm a regional executive committee member of the African National Congress in Johannesburg. So I guess I'm the big bad monster in I preside over 125 branches across Johannesburg, across 5 organizations from COSAS up to the ANC. I develop their political education curriculums and I ensure that they are carried out. I agree with a lot that has been said about the ANC. And I also agree that even though we could say today that the predominant contradictions in society today are more class than they are national, but the reality is that the level of consciousness of our society enjoins us to consider the approach of my comrade there, that we still do need national liberation movements in the course of advancing our class struggle. I just have only one question. Why the EFF and not the ANC? Because both are national liberation movements. What is it that we think we are going to find in the EFF that is not in the ANC? Because if both of them are national liberation movements, so their characters are most likely the same. That's why somebody raised the issue of VPS. If we are running away from corruption in the ANC, we are definitely going to find corruption in the EFF. Because both of them are national liberation movements. In fact, without making anyone angry, I just think the EFF is just a little bit angrier version of the ANC. So I want you to help me why you don't want to work with me and want to work with the others.
Thank you. Thank you again for the opportunity to rise. I think that is an example of why these conversations are important. And I forget your name now, but you spoke about in the beginning finding ways to move forward, and that's actually something that at least a point that I rise on, because having recognized the violence that has been perpetuated on us, I think it's very important that we make it a culture for us revolutionaries, people that call themselves as radicals, to use these meetings and these platforms to organize our own violence. And yeah, that's just something I wanted to say on the side. But I think it was Phineas that spoke about the fragmentation of the struggle and how we need to be unified. And that's something that I've been really thinking about. So I'd like to read a couple of, at least two values that we share as the PC, which is what I want to talk about. So the first one is self-determination. And we say, self-determination means all power to all the people. It means bottom-up decision-making by councils of all concerned in the interests of the all concerned. Electoralism and liberal democracy have served to oppress black, female, working, and queer, and other marginalized communities. Therefore, we reject these forms of politics. We demand self-determination because it means communities working hand in hand, building a life of dignity and happiness. And perhaps I'll just end there, but that's where my question lies in trying to unify us against the ground. Is what do we think about the vanguard? Because someone raised a point of black middle class intellectuals, and in my own understanding, that's exactly what a vanguard is. So I really believe that we should look beyond these structures that we have known in terms of organizing our people and in our own communities. So how do we then begin to actually work with each other? Because I think one problem that we face as a people is we are very alienated from one another, right? And we can sit here and talk about all the problems that we are going through, but in our communities, people are not talking to each other. People believe that their problems are manifested because it's their fault and nobody else's, right? So I think first of all, trying to amend that fragmentation is creating discourse and conversation between people that actually suffer the most. And that means in a room that is bigger than this. But I really believe that is where us as people who have accepted the responsibilities will actually find answers of how to move forward. Because there's nobody that can explain the oppression more than the people that are oppressed. So we should look beyond each other and actually do the hard work and going into these communities, talking to people and let people for themselves decide what they want their life to look like through the means of direct action and all else. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, you know, corruption reminds me of a quote. You know that Greg's quote about corrupt officials. Is the EFF, are the EFF corrupt officials, or is it the ANC?
Thank you, comrades. My name is Sadi Mkwani from the Socialist Party of Azania. I think our presenters or the comrades who were in the debate already said a mouthful about the history But I'm a bit touched about the topic of the EFF right now. I think that's the topic that we must resolve on. But I think we're in unison in most cases in terms of the class line, the class struggle. I would say, comrades, we must always draw a class line, as the oppressed class for ourselves. We must always do that. Don't try to collaborate with the bourgeois organization. I say, don't even try to collaborate with the bourgeois organization, because while we are trying to intensify the struggle, it's gonna get dangerous for us when we are collaborating with this bourgeois organization. So, if the EFF got a progressive campaign that is saying those peasants in the farmlands are being killed, so we must go stop that. Yes, we must separate with them, but try fight or attack in unison. Why can't we the contradiction in terms of how bourgeois they are or how rhetoric they are in the context of the occupied Azania? How does they compare?
Sorry, is the mic on? Okay. Okay, I just want to say, in terms of imperialism, I would also say imperialism is one of the biggest enemies. The imperialists don't come to you and say, this is how we are going to rob you, this is how we're going to do our business. They have left covers, they have NGOs that basically sneak into these community activists, and they do it also to undermine those nationalist governments in the neocolonial countries, and they also take sides on behalf of the CIA, a common CIA official saying, Saddam Hussein is a son of a bitch, but he's our son of a bitch. And what happened to Saddam Hussein in the end? They didn't bring freedom to, Iraq. They basically executed him publicly. So if these attacks from the nationalists, it must actually come from the working class. And that's how, but it shouldn't come from the imperialists. And we must be able to see, who these imperialists are. If you go across the road outside, what are these NGOs? The aid, for example, you say men's health. They basically, this is the result of how, the result of the blackmail of these NGOs. And telling people that they consume too much, because of the environment. But they don't say those things. They say it in a very, slick way with a left cover. So I think we must be able to see who these imperialists and what their narratives are. I think also I just want to ask, comrades, and also, what do you actually disagree with the actual Freedom Charter? Why? For example, land. That is something that the proletariat must fight for. The problem with that is that the ANC betrayed that. So the proletariat has to fight for it. And I think when it comes to, the question of dual power, the way the SACP will always say, the point was to actually just rule in an harmonious way a capitalist government here. Lenin didn't wait 30 years to, challenge all the other left. He basically fought for leadership of that NDR and fought and was successful in the October Revolution. But he didn't wait for all the other left to finish, or even the liberal bourgeoisie to finish off the democratic revolution, because they were going to betray it. He fought for authority of that revolution. Okay. So,
thank you very much. I'm not sure if it works, but I'm sure it will. So the topic for today is national liberation, class struggle, and class of revolutionaries. I think what the topic maybe should have had maybe as a subheading is what is unity, how do you build unity, and what is the basis of unity? I think that's the kind of question in my mind that's floating in the room and nobody's really touching on it. I think there's an emphasis on class struggle, there's an emphasis on the issue of class and race, and those are the which have not been resolved, and there are now dispensations keep them going so much longer. And then I sort of heard the criticism of adventurism. So we get involved in stuff, it's a bit of an adventure, but doesn't really address the issue of the fundamental or the dominant contradictions in society. So yeah, if you want to build this, okay, so we can have tasks for revolutionaries, but in those things you're not on the same page. We're not on the same page with what unity is, what the basis of unity is. The freedom job is not a millennium program, not even a transitional program. So be very clear about that. Why I think I am. You know, who's more or less corrupt? I don't even that's a question. It's a distraction. I think you've heard from colleagues that there's work to be done. But even that work needs to be guided. Because how do I judge my leaders not going to sell me out tomorrow? How do I know what the criteria and principles and programmatic struggle that I need to understand is going to bring? Get me to identify that one. Say, this one is not going to be. This one needs to be replaced. This is not the organization that he wants to go because he wants to hijack it into, I don't know, where the salaries and the benefits. So the fundamental question for me for today, as apart from the fundamental contradictions or the dominant contradictions that we face, is what is unity? How do you build unity? And what is the basis of it? And if we can't agree on what the basis of unity is, I guess unity is going to be elusive. As I heard from the speakers and the chair, that somehow unity is critical in getting people to understand what the tasks are of a revolution is and how to execute the national liberation struggle, or for that matter, like class struggle. Thanks.
Should we be moving on to proposing? So to certain proposals now? Because we've spoken, we have the summaries, but the summaries are usually conclusions. We haven't, how can we go to conclusions when there's no action plan? So we have all these people over here, we've had people addressing the audience, participants. Shouldn't we propose to nominate participants so that we can move this forward? Otherwise, we're going to, in 2 months' time, 3 months' time, early next year, we're going to have another debate. Shouldn't we propose a committee? How do you feel? Would you like to speak about that?
Thanks, Paul. I think proposals, there are few proposals that have been made by Congress. But also we still have to clarify some of the issues as they are being raised by Congress. So what constitutes unity and solidarity? What principles that informs? I think that's what the question that was asking. So this is not the first sitting Congress. We've been having this series of discussions and engagements as Congress that have been here in this session. And in some of the instances, we were able to say we are anti-racist, we are anti-imperialist, we are anti-xenophobia. We were able to outline those kinds of principles. That these are the principles that informs our work in building unity and solidarity. I think those questions were answered to, because this is not the first session. there's a proposal that has been made around how we move forward as the comrades here to advance the cause of the socialist revolution or liberation for our people. I made that proposal earlier on the question of the legitimacy of the current government and what needs to happen. And also the question of the constitution itself. And the proposal was that it's what Comrade Phineas has also talked about in his paper, which is the Independent Constituent Assembly. And when I made that proposal, I also made a proposal about the date. That maybe if we agree on Independent Constituent Assembly, we can target the next year's date of, what do you call that date? The SONA, you see, to constitute or to launch the process of constituting this Independent Constituent Assembly, which should be charged, of course, with the task of building a new constitution for this country, a constitution that will warmly respond to the interests and the aspirations of our people. You know, for me, that if we agree on that, will be undermining their strategy, the strategy of Amakudari, this national dialogue, in its place, putting forward this Independent Constituent Assembly.
Thank you, Comrade. So should we set a date for, I mean,
let's agree first on Independent Constituent Assembly that's been held. If we all agree on this, then we should decide.
Comrade, I don't want to hook to a recipe, but I think it's pretty axiomatic that you've got the first of 60s power before you can constitute yourself as a constituent assembly. Even the Bourgeois knew that in the French Revolution. But I'm not saying that it isn't invalid to demand that the Constitution does not serve. And yes, we can demand a constituent assembly, but understand it's demonstrative rather than substantive. Because the substantive thing is accompanied by an overthrow of the present order and a constitution of the various forces. I want to propose instead that, and besides, even if we get granted this right to the Constituent Assembly, guess who's going to write the Constitution ultimately? Because we won't have power on the streets. So the fact of the matter is, we need to be very clear. SAF 2, at this point in time, has launched, or is about to launch, a campaign. It seeks to unite the entire working class in its representation in the workplace, which is dwindling incidentally, but more substantively in its expression at the place of residence, and to combine those struggles, to start building capacity. We all don't have to agree on everything, but if we agree water is a demand, then even if constituent assembly is a demand, whether we say it's demonstrative or substantive, we follow the procedure or the approach of United Front tactic with one understanding. It isn't a united front of us as individuals and little cliques. It is a united front of workers' organizations. And if we don't build workers' organizations, then we'll be still having these little united front discussions between ourselves, almost incestuously. So this is what I think should be done. Practically, yes, Comrade Tommy, free to have that as the demand, and those who want to support you on that demand will participate in that. But we need to engage firstly in building capacity in the class, building the political education in the class, and that doesn't only mean sitting and having reading groups, because there are quantum leaps in the consciousness of the class. In the late 80s, we had the most advanced working class in the world. It is the so-called revolutionaries that dissipated that momentum. So I'm suggesting we orient towards what is happening with SAFTU on the clear understanding that we seek to unite the entire class, irrespective of whether they reside and have partialities to the ANC, the EFF, or COSATU. And we take what is clearly being conceived of not only as an economistic defense of the working class, which trade unionists are one to orient to, but it is becoming a political issue because the circumstances or the political issues are becoming so very, very troubling to the surface right now. That's how I suggest we should be comrades. Thank you.
Thank you so much. My name is Patricia. I am from Avanikas Bendawo in Gauteng, near 4. I'd like to answer my comment because he has posed a question and no one seems to want to answer it. Why the EFF and not the ANC? You are 100% right, comrade. You are both the same WhatsApp group. According to me, the EFF is not yet ready to lead this country because Malema is unable to account. Carltonville on its own, my comrade said that every camp is Gaza. Carltonville is Gaza. The EFF is there. Each and every weekend, we have people being gunned down in the taxi industry in Carltonville. That's our life now. The EFF is on the sidelines. How do you trust that particular party to rule over you or to govern if they are unable to make sure that type of these issues, they attend to them and they resolve them? So as the ANC. Hence I'm saying, he's 100% right to say, we are the same. They have been cut from the same cloth. So we should accept that. All I want to say is that as a community activist, we are on our own. Let's be clear and understand that and accept it. No one is coming to rescue us. Only ourselves are able to do that. The only way is to find out how do we do it. How do we do it? My comrade said, I probably am living in the wrong side of the track. It's difficult to get into such spaces like this one that I'm at. We should take that to note. He's not the only one. Because this government of us has instilled fear in our people and hatred. Now we are seeing each other as enemies, not understanding that the very same people that we see as them being higher over us, they also understand our struggles and they want to participate and assist. But because they don't know how to get in, we should also capitalize on that. Go and start from the grassroots and have these type of sittings in those type of neighborhoods. We go in and we teach our people. They should now start to learn to stand on their own because we are on our own. Thank you.
We agree. The question is how. The question is always how. So you need people to lead, and you need people to coordinate. So what I'm suggesting earlier on, can't we nominate people to lead and to coordinate? Say something? Shall we go back?
The revolutionary struggle is very complicated, complex. And I don't think that you can have one meeting of less than a day and come up with what are we going to do. So the key thing that is needed is to mobilize independently the working class and the poor against the bourgeoisie nationalists. And what has happened now, that war has already started. I explained in my presentation that for 30 years, they were giving the country to liberate the people, but what did they do? They left the country with a hole, corruption, because they don't own property. They're only concerned about corruption. They are concerned about their consumption. So what they do, if they will give them 100 rand, they each 80 rand and 20 rand go to investment. So that is what is happening. And that has come to an end. The masses of the people have learned that through their experience. You're not going to tell them that, oh no, let's try the ANC. July 2021, there was a huge uprising in Durban. They killed between 300 and 400 people who were fighting and saying, who are sick and tired. There's about 40% of the people that are unemployed and unemployable. So people that don't have a future. The challenge that is facing us is to mobilize independently for a communist revolution that must bring down this system. It cannot be reformed. That is one thing that needs to be clear. You need to mobilize independently against this system to smash it and create a dictatorship of the proletariat that is going to expropriate the bourgeoisie, take the economy from the hands of the capitalist class and collectivize them. You use that to address the problems of our people that are always starving and going worse and worse into hunger and desperation.
Can we move on to how?
I just want to say this process that's going on here, there are processes taking place all over the country. Every week, we, as the Solidarity Action Committee Collective, from now to the middle of December, every weekend, we are involved in one conference or another. People are beginning to search for answers. Everybody is saying what is to be done. Everywhere. There are comrades of ours that are right now participating in the Kawu conference, a 3-day conference to discuss what is to be done. Now, I think it's all building up to a call on SAFTU and the big players, the big organizations of the working class, to call an assembly of the working class to discuss the question of what is to be done. And that's the pressure we're also putting on the leadership of SAFTU and in the struggles that we wage and wherever we go. We're calling for the formation of a united front. We're calling for a discussion, a campaign for a mass workers' party, but we're doing it in the organizations that we are participating with while we continue to build independently on the ground in the working class. I think that process is beginning to unfold, and I don't think we should be in a hurry to form a committee here, because we'll be a committee of lots of people that do no political work in the working classes.
Thank you very much. I literally thought I was going to walk out of this meeting without having said anything. But I think it's key. Can you now hear me my comments? Because I wouldn't want to say anything that none of you here will have heard. I want you to hear me 100% clear, especially when addressing the question that was raised by my comrade here. But not only that, I'm also like my comrades, I'm becoming a bit skeptical that it seems like we're going talking, but we're really not speaking to the problem as it is. The problem is the governing party and its system. So when I'm saying its system, I'm saying even if we were to get the EFF coming in under the current system, we are about to get the same result. So they are all going to be corrupt. So I was thinking some speakers were right when they were saying the system. So after we have spoken about the system, I'm thinking
the only thing to be done so that we can bring about change is to overthrow the very same system and create a different system that will be able to bring the change that our people have been seeking for. Just a minute. I'm saying this, considering the fact that when the ANC was formed, it was never really formed to bring change. The ANC was formed to be included of what was happening prior it was formed. Now, they did not change anything, which is why they still carry within their constitution some of the policies that were in the apartheid system. So we can't be sitting here gathering ourselves and also want to be included as to what can be done. There's only one thing that can be done. Let's overthrow the current system, implement the new system, which is not the one that is being used currently. So we can move. And when we were still in the ANC meetings, along with Julius Malema, it was very clear to say we need socialism. But for us to bring socialism to South Africa is not going to happen overnight or even in a decade's time. We need at least about 50 years' time to can realize. Now, getting married to that corporate club, you only be part of socialist state when we are achieving it in 50 years. Maybe it's the reason why we still studying and not addressing the real question that what we need is not going to be realized in a decade's time. Along with us, so bear with us, comrades, that we, especially as young as I am, can only call for the overthrowing of the current system, regardless of the political party leading that very same current system. So we are calling for the overthrowing of the system, replace it with a socialist system to take care of everyone. That's the thing I want to
I'm also going to throw my head into the house person. So, before I do that, let me just speak like this. The question of the ANC, I mean, he asks, in fact, when it comes to but anyway, why not the ANC? Look, the negotiated settlement, you know, that should be reason enough for you. That buried the struggle for national liberation. There are multiple answers. Marikana Massacre being one of them. So there's plenty to say about it. And the other thing about, again, touches on what you said about the EFF. Yeah, I mean, look, the EFF strategy is based on the aspirations of the black elites. The ANC has the black elites now. They are raising their banners and we're the alternative. These guys are so done. Just let them go. We are opposed to. We should break with the aspirations of the black elites. That is the class that is incapable of leading this struggle to victory. And the fight against apartheid demonstrates that. The chief lesson from that fight is that workers must fight for leadership against this class in opposition and competition with them. The life we're living, our experiences today, that is the fruits of that leadership. It led us here where we are. So workers must fight to be there. And again, going back to what I said previously, that point goes with the question of fusing class struggle with fight for national liberation, and it all boils down to how you use the fight for national liberation for our social emancipation. Now that's the hard thing. The hard part. I'm wearing a t-shirt, we call it Colonical t-shirt here. This guy, by the way, was accused of being a terrorist by the ANC government, the GNU, right? He posted a video urging people to protest the GNU, racism of the DA, people like Peter Bunabal, the hardliners who are in government. These people opposed, even declared, So he posted a TikTok video complaining about all of this, and he was charged. You know, with terrorism charges. His phone is taken away. Several times, like a range of things. You know, simply because he voiced political opposition to the GNU. Okay, so we, together with the EFF, by the way, initiated a United Front event, you know, for this guy. He is a member of SAMU, or was a member of SAMU, so you know, believe it or not. You know, from the leading role in the strike, you know, Expo, where he works, defending workers. It's just one example of what can be done. There are plenty of these attacks. Okay, we have great differences with the EFF and other organizations that were involved. Some in the left, by the way, but this is how you build unity. In spite of our political, we don't give up our political differences. We unite in action, right? We defend each other when, you know, when the GNU or the imperialists attack. And this is what is called for. We need to defend, you know, at the moment. This is, you know, the kind of struggle that is called for defense. A lot of the left is posing, you know, or raising banners that are typical, and we cannot disagree with those banners, but they are typical of when they try to make offensive. But you look at our fragmentation, you know, our electoral situation, how weak we are, when we cannot even bring that many forces to defend ourselves. How do we get to a point where we, you know, occupy lands or whatever the case may be, like those kind of, you know, I'm not saying those are wrong, you know, no Marxist can, you know, oppose that, but whether they are appropriate in a given context is the question, you know. We think that we also organize struggles to defend ourselves against the GNU and the imperialists. And you can see, you know, Trump is not holding back. They're dying out. They're dying of attacks. And the fifth column, the orange thing, is there. Ramaphosa, you know, I don't know, man, this guy, so he cannot even challenge the fifth column. Even from his own distorted nationalist point of view, he's unable to do that. But these guys are driving in the imperialist agenda in the country. Makombe spoke about, you know, the NGOs, how imperialist NGOs and one. And effectively, our situation, our poverty, inequality is being used against us. And these things need to be pointed out. It's the way of defending ourselves.
The summaries, I think we're not going to have time.
Yeah, just before we start the summaries. Or perhaps you can start with a summary as well. So shall we start the summary, but if you can.
It'll be the second and the second.
Yeah, so if you can make a contribution with regards to. Yes, but I think you start with the summaries. Okay. And from the this will start and then you bring it.
In our summary, that is why I'm saying, not saying my summary, I'm saying our summary, because of we are working with Congolese and we acknowledge working with one another. And then our struggle is that the class struggle, we fight to defend it in which is through our action committees, whereby we find the capacity to defend the working class through those action committees. And we think working in our day-to-day programs, we don't shy away from getting our hands dirty and addressing the issues affecting our communities. And then through that action committees, we work in our day-to-day programs and we don't shy away from doing that instead. But my conclusion is that we see the class struggle is intensifying.
and we need to take action. And through taking action is by working each and every day to unite our working class and the poor, and to give them class consciousness and political classes so that they can be conscious of the situation they are facing in their communities and how to be subject to it. Thank you all.
Amanda, comrades, in summary of what we were discussing here, I think it's very important to agree, as we have agreed, that capitalism is inherently barbaric, and there is no alternative to socialism but barbarism, which is capitalism. So there is no way in which you can modify capitalism. Capitalism modifies itself and allows itself. So we need to learn the tactics of going against it at every inch. And we have discussed here around the possible scenarios which will be able to unite ourselves. And I think the people who make us gather here today, they need to do it again. Or not until we are ready, because we are from organizations here. We are going to report back on what we have discussed here. And then when we come back the next time you invite us, we will have a concrete way of how we can unite ourselves against this monster. Thank you.
Dear comrades, the first question is the independent mobilization of the working class against all bourgeoisie nationalist parties, including the EFF, the ANC, and any other bourgeoisie party. Because you support them, they get into power, they turn against you. We know about Marikana, we know about many other instances in the world. We know about China 1927, we know about Indonesia 1965. Always when the working class organization supports the nationalists get into power, they turn around and kill those working class supporters. It is key to mobilize the workers independently. I have proposed in the face that already the working class and the poor in this country have reached a deadlock. The evidence of that is the last election, where the workers are saying we're sick and tired of it. It's not taking us anywhere. So what is next is going to happen is going to be a confrontation. What we need is to mobilize the workers independently. We need the Soviets that mobilizes the workers independently, because most of these left organizations have been discredited by supporting the ANC or other bourgeoisie nationalist organizations. We need to call for the Soviets. That is going to include workers. It must be based on workers, the students, the community, and they will say, what do we need to do to move forward against this government, to call it GNU or whatever the capitalist government here. That is what we need to do. We need to mobilize for the dictatorship of the proletariat that is going to overthrow the system. There is no way that we can meet with them. So let's organize independent to smash these people who are running the system, killing us. Let's
Thank
Thank you, everybody. It's been an interesting debate. To follow up that, though, the comrade here raised a question about unity. And I think that, so, we need a debate because, as you can see, there's wildly conflicting views among those on the left about how to actually go forward. Now, you can ignore all that. You can say, we're for Soviets, we're for the dictatorship of the proletariat, so are we. Great, let's get together and call on the workers to go out and build Soviets and achieve the dictatorship of the proletariat. I don't know really if anybody seriously believes that this, at this moment, is actually going to do anything to help arm the working class, which we're talking about, which we do actually, the left does need to get into the working class and deal with actually defending the working class against what is coming to it right now. Does anybody know, for example, the largest union in the country and on the continent, NUMSA, with over 400,000 members? Are they getting ready to go out and build Soviets and take over those factories, those auto plants? The car tire plants are being shut down by the imperialists? No. Are the workers of NUMSA waiting for us to come out and tell them to come and build the Soviets? You've got to be kidding me. The working class is in shock. And it's a shock that, I'm sorry, comrades, but the imperialists are the ones who are driving this shock. It is U.S. imperialism that is putting the screws to this country, just like they're putting the screws to the entire globe, and in particular the global south, to reassert their hegemony. And sometimes when I hear the discussion about the nationalists, it reminds me of, I think, a big problem with the left is psychology. It's a Russian saying. It's something like, to a mouse, the house cat looks like a lion. That is the way the left deals with the nationalists. Okay, and there's a point. Both the house cat and the lion do want to eat you. They want to devour you. They're gonna crush you. But if you can't tell the difference between the two, and you can't tell the difference between who is actually calling the shots and driving them, and the methods that need to be dealt with to actually defeat them, to defend yourselves against them, then you're actually not very much help to the working class and to the oppressed masses. Okay? And you can go and call for Soviets, you can go and say they're all just bourgeois, we don't have an interest in any of them. But to answer the question that the ANC member raised is, I think you don't have to be a Marxist to tell, on the one hand, yes, the ANC and the EFF are cut from the same cloth. They are both, their tradition and where they come from is a radical petty bourgeois nationalist tradition. Like I said, the EFF's program of the Cardinal Pillars is an update of the Freedom Charter. But just saying that, and saying that the Freedom Charter doesn't get us to socialism, doesn't put the working class in power, actually doesn't answer any of the questions. Because the masses of this country in the 1980s were rallied and mobilized because they wanted to fight for aspirations like the Freedom Charter. So is your answer to that to say, we don't want to deal with that because those guys are bourgeois? If you're doing that, you're actually not helping in any way to attack the authority of the bourgeois nationalists. You're actually helping to reinforce it. And that is what one section of the radical left did in the 1980s, the workers, right? They said, we don't want to do anything, united fronts with these bourgeois organizations, people who support the ANC, they're bad, they're for capitalism, we're not going to have anything to do with them. What happened? Did they strengthen the left? No, they ceded the ground. And when the masses started to move in the mid-80s, it was all politically dominated by the ANC, including quite a number of the former workers who went over to the ANC and the SACP. So that's not an answer. And the other answer too is not to say, oh, they're great. We just need to keep them on the track. Like what you said, tailing the EFF would be a very disastrous proposition. But how is competing for struggle of the anti-imperialist competing for leadership of the anti-imperialist struggle to try to give it a revolutionary class struggle basis and methods, how is that tailing the EFF? And how is that not actually dealing with the current situation? Because I tell you, the capitalists, the rulers, they definitely see a difference between the ANC and the EFF. They're not Marxists. They don't see a difference between the class character and the nature, but they can see that this ANC, we can work with them. But Donald Trump didn't call to take out Malema just because he heard about PBS and he's worried about the savings accounts of all those pensioners. No, he called to take him out because he says this person represents. He showed the video. He's speaking in a stadium with hundreds of thousands of EFF members who are saying, "We want the land. We want to kill the system that keeps the white minority on top." I think we should not be indifferent to that. If we are sort of like, again, the house cat and the lion. So, I mean, I think it's misguided to try to have a committee coming out of this debate. It's a debate to start to clarify what are the actual differences, not in a demagogic way, not distorting and saying you want to tail the bourgeoisie because you think that the competing to actually take the struggle forward is necessary, but about where do we actually begin in this current situation. And every defensive action necessarily confronts imperialism in this country. The water crisis, right? Except when you look at it, what was the last protest about water in Joburg? What program dominated that protest? Lots of comrades were here. Comrades from SOCO were part of organizing it. The program that dominated that protest on the November 1st was a pro-imperialist program. It was a pro-GNU, pro-austerity program. And most of the left was unable to actually do anything to draw a line against that. And to talk about mobilizing the working class independently, if you do not fight to mobilize the working class against imperialism, including not just its own economic interests, but the interests of all of the masses, the unemployed, the landless, that is a total distortion of working class political independence. It has nothing to do with Marxism and what Lenin and the Bolsheviks and Trotsky fought for and how they made the October Revolution. So I think it would be good if rather than try to come up with some declaration or whatever, we have proposals. The comrades from South have their proposal about the Constituent Assembly. We have our proposal. We've circulated it to actually fight, not for some thing that is unreal about software is going to occupy all the factories tomorrow. They couldn't even get the representatives from their unions on a Zoom call to tell us about these factories. Anybody who thinks that they are going to start occupying the factories tomorrow, if this is realistic, is actually helping build illusions in the software. We think there should be united defense of the working class, workers' economic conditions. Fight against the closures. Fight against the retrenchments. But to actually make that successful and to build unity behind the working class is impossible if you do not go after imperialism, if you do not defend the masses and the economy against imperialism. And so that's what our proposal about actually urging and trying to explain and pushing these organizations, including AMCU, including NUMSA, lots of members who traditionally supported the EFF, that they should actually do something to defend the EFF. And that does not mean because we think Julius Malema is God's gift to humanity, the son of the soil, or any of this, or his hands are squeaky clean. It's because we know what is at stake. If the imperialists are able to lock him up, all of our struggles are going to be set back. So we have that proposal, and we think that these are concrete proposals which the organization should take back and discuss. We should look for ways to work together, but we shouldn't try to paper over the differences that we have with some false declaration.
I know you'd like like to say something to defend, but
No, not defending, I wanted to know the aims.
or to respond. But we're at the end of our program, and I'd really like to have private discussions with many of you. I think you've made very, very important contributions, and thank you for showing up today. Thank you.
And literature tables are at the back. Literature tables.